you, April. As I said, we're recording the session and Alice will share it in a follow-up email. If you're uncomfortable with your name showing, you can change your name to anonymous and then private message April with your name for attendance. I'm going to go ahead and do our land acknowledgement. Texas Children in Nature Network is headquartered in Austin, and as such, I'm on the ancestral and unceded land of the Tonkawa, Comanche, and Sana people. Our ongoing colonial presence on indigenous lands compels us to take action now to counteract the effects of colonization. The work we do through the Texas Children in Nature Network is one small step towards that effort. And I'm going to put some links in the chat in just a moment about land acknowledgements. And then I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker. So our speaker tonight is Adam Flores. He is with Roam Wild. Welcome, Adam, and we're glad that you're able to join us today.
Hi, thanks so much. Really appreciate it, Sarah. Hi, everyone. Welcome to tonight's session. Thanks for joining us on a weeknight. Really appreciate it. So I'm excited to talk to you all tonight about kind of a hybrid conversation of a little bit of Roam Wild, as well as mostly the bulk of it, design thinking and developing a problem of practice and answering that problem of practice using the design thinking process, which is how Roam Wild got started. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and see, there we go. Should be sharing.
Yep, we've got it.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. Great. So I am a lifelong educator. I've been in education for 16 years. I started out as a teacher in Colorado and then was a assistant principal and principal down here in Texas. I moved here about 10 years or 8 years ago, excuse me. And as such, as an educator, I'm a firm believer in folks knowing ahead of time what it is that they're learning. For those of you who are education lovers, this has a huge effect size on outcomes for learners, both for kids as well as for adults. So the session outcomes for tonight, we're learning about the power of design thinking to solve, as a tool, to solve for complex problems, complex dilemmas. By the end of this session, you should be able to, or will have, defined what design thinking is, practice using design thinking mindsets to engage in questioning and listening, and practice using design thinking processes to create solutions to a dilemma. So we are going to start out, like I said, by looking at our organization, Roam Wild, and how we got rolling with regards to our organization within the context of design thinking. So we started with conversations several years ago, asking questions about access to nature, and specifically access to nature for kids between the ages of 10, 11, and 18. And then more specifically within the state of Texas, and just thinking about long-term nationally as well. And so there is, some data out there that I'm sure everybody is aware of about the exposure that youth have to the outdoors, as well as the importance of that exposure. Excuse me, sorry. And so we know from years of research and the growing body of research within the wonderful world of experiential learning and outdoor education, especially the University of New Hampshire, that there are huge social, emotional learning impacts for youth, especially teenagers, especially females between the ages of 12 and 16 when exposed to multiple days in the wilderness. And so the substantial impact on social emotional development for children is huge, but we also know that most kids don't get to experience that. And so that was kind of our opening topic, and then we dug further to get more kind of deeper into the weeds, if you will, with gathering information and data around the specifics of who has been denied access to nature. And so holistically, there was a report that came out in 2019, 2020, when we started doing this work, that had this kind of fascinating and sad reality of where we're at as a society, where we're at as a country. And that is that we've had 1 billion fewer outdoor recreational activities experienced in the United States since 2008. So between that 10-year gap, which is massive, right? Now, this went into as great a detail as, outdoor play, things that are really basically playing in the playground, playing basketball, playing soccer, et cetera, in addition to those other outdoor recreational activities. So just kind of keep that in mind in terms of that statistic. As we are all probably familiar with, there's a huge gap between between people of color and their access to the outdoors, especially within national parks, as well, and then people, white people who have traditionally been kind of the present dominant culture within public lands. And so you can see through the statistics here, those gaps are huge, right? So there's a population of people of color representing 40% of our community within the United States, but only 9% of public land visits. Black Americans are historically or acutely impacted in that only 1 to 2%, and that varies from year to year, but it's extremely low. And then lastly, especially in terms of the way that I was kind of looking and gathering data, wanting to start a youth program, that a huge part of the problem is around finance, right? So we all know outdoor time costs money, costs gas money to get there, it costs money for gear. There's so much that goes into it. This is part of the reason why so many folks don't get out into the great outdoors. And so when we started thinking about how we might be able to impact that, we looked at financial aid and the way that we can support through financial aid. The staggering statistic that kind of killed me was that only 7% of camps offer financial aid to 90% of their campers. And so we wanted to increase that number as much as possible while still staying, financially viable as a nonprofit. And so we supplement a lot of that work through donations and philanthropic. So taken together, we've got this opportunity. There are a few opportunities for children from different racial and socioeconomic backgrounds to build shared experiences, connect and collaborate with one another, and break down barriers. And so from that, we developed Roam Wild. Digging into that a little further, I'll do that here in the next slide, but the focus of our organization is really to work to build bridges across divides within our community, specifically the Texas community, but hopefully eventually a larger community as well, by bringing kids together from different backgrounds and working through carefully designed outdoor adventures. And so, we have the statistic has changed a little bit or the stat for us has changed a little bit, so that the majority of our kids, more than 75% now, are really on a sliding scale, with at least 40 to 50% of our kids actually not paying anything. And so we feel really good about that. Digging into the design work, so kind of transitioning a little bit to the focus for tonight, I'm going to just walk you through kind of what we did over the course of 2 years. And so we started, again, looking at the research, making sure that we had the right question, the right problem, and then jumping into conversations about access to nature with folks from the community. And you'll see that in the third bullet point there. So the questions that I was supported around, and there was an organization that I worked with out of New Orleans to help really refine what it was that I was looking to do. They asked the question, how do you know it's the right problem? And then how do you know that how do you know it's a problem, excuse me, and was it really truly the right problem to be solving? And so those were two questions that we were kind of pressure tested around. Once we defined that, we went back to the community and went through a host of interviews, dozens and dozens of interviews with folks from around the Dallas-Fort Worth area, in this case, reaching out to nonprofits, community members, leaders, families, kids, and getting a wide range of data that was really helpful back to start defining what it was that folks need. So we went through the defining the defining work. Then we started to ideate certain ideas around the needs of the community. Finally, we built out a prototype, and then lastly, we tested that prototype. So there's really quick kind of spurts of activities or experiences that the targeted group, in this case kids, between the ages of, in this case it was 13 to 15, that we could start getting feedback and through observations and survey data to see whether or not the things we were testing was really going to be where we needed to head, right? And so collecting that data, using that data, and in all honesty, throughout the last year, as we've had more opportunity to take kids out, sorry, I'm hiccuping, as we've had more chance to take kids out, we've continued to refine. So family interviews, family surveys, youth interviews, before and after are things that I pay a ton of attention to and use to kind of reimagine and re-envision or refine, I should say, next sessions or future sessions. And so all of this process obviously led to the founding of Roam Wild more recently. And then obviously the part of this that's most important for our work tonight is that this process was design thinking. So if you're familiar with design thinking, awesome. If you've never come across design thinking, that's totally fine. This is definitely an introductory course to what design thinking is, and we just kind of get people into the basic understanding of what design thinking is and how to use it. I've learned it's super helpful to start with what design thinking isn't, to kind of define the features that we would normally see outside of the design thinking world. And so to run through that, I'm going to start with a problem that is certainly a real problem, that America's natural spaces have a legacy of racial and ethnic exclusion, right? This is not something that is foreign to any of us. We know that this is true. I'm using it tonight as just an example. And now I want to imagine that this is, again, not the design thinking way. And I would also argue maybe not the best way to go about solving or creating solutions. But let's say that the group of people running the system could be the National Park Service at the federal level, could be State Park Service, at whatever level, that system, the people within that system decide to make decisions, right? And these are not necessarily bad decisions, right? Many of these examples that are up here right now, you can see, are great things. These are things that we should be doing, right? Hire more diverse staff, create and promote opportunities for inclusive programs and events, reframe the mission and vision to be more inclusive, and then develop metrics to measure racial and ethnic backgrounds. Those are important things. We should be doing those. However, that doesn't actually mean that what we're doing is the right thing, and then it's going to make people, the user, the end user, feel more confident, comfortable, safe in experiencing the outdoors in this case, right? And that's really what we're after in the design thinking world, is when we get to the end user, when we observe the end user, when we talk to the end user, that's where we get the best information that's going to support our next steps. So what is design thinking? So I use, again, another example using National Park Service. And again, this is just an example. This is not something the National Park Service did, or if it is, I'm unaware of it. So recognize that there's a problem, right? People of color did not visit parks at rates commensurate with population percentages, or do not, I should say. This is a real problem. We're just using it as an example for tonight, though. And that is the defined problem. Before I actually move forward at all, I would want to make sure through collection of data, not the design process, but conversations with our organizations, looking at observable data to make sure that we know that we're defining this correctly, right? In this case, fewer and fewer people of color are visiting parks or have visited parks. We know that that's a problem, so it's pretty easy for us to define that here tonight. From there, the National Park Service decides to interview thousands of people within the communities they want to affect change with, And they do that through really thoughtful questions and listening deeply, right? We're going to practice that here a little bit. And that is really the empathy interviews that you'll see coming up tonight. Then they went back with all of their data and they analyzed the interview data looking for patterns and trends from what people said. Ideally, you want to use quotes whenever possible. When you're just starting out, it's helpful to bring a notebook, maybe even a recorder, so that you can really capture the essence of what people are saying. Obviously, you need to let them know, but that can be a really powerful experience to get those quotes and use those quotes in your work. So after the analyzation is of the trends and patterns that people is the defining, right? That's the defining part of design thinking. And then they moved into thinking big, this idea of brainstorming ways to creatively solve the problems based on the community and individual needs. And that is the ideation, right? That's a huge part of this work. And it can be a really fun, invigorating part of the work. It can also be really difficult and sometimes frustrating. But I always tell folks that are moving through this to just embrace the mess, right? And you'll see that coming up as a norm later on tonight. And then from that list of ideas, they started to think of what are the prototypes? What are the things we need to test? What are the ways we can test with the activities that we can create? Again, usually short snippets. We're not creating a whole new program. We're just looking to test an idea from our ideation phase. And so from all the different prototypes we come up with, it could be 3 prototypes, it could be a dozen prototypes, depending on how long or how short your time period is or what you're trying to do. The larger the problem, it's probably more important to have more prototypes to collect more evidence, right? And so the last part of that is logistics and making sure that you've got your logistics squared away before you move into testing, right? And so you move through the testing phase, collect all the evidence, and more than likely you're going to find yourself back at either more empathy interviews or looking to do different prototypes or needing to refine what the needs of the community are. So when we talk about that pre-work before you even get to your empathy interviews, a big part of that is developing a problem of practice. There's a tiny URL here in front of you all. I'm not going to spend very much time talking about the defining features since it's a great 2-pager. These are folks in there. So my educational history is I spent my graduate school years at Harvard, and so Lee Title and Richard Elmore, 2 of my favorite professors in the world, really defined how to develop a problem of practice, originally around school, but more recently brought into the nonprofit world. And how do we develop and create problems of practice in traditional organizations or nonprofits? And so I would definitely highly recommend taking the URL, taking a look at the reading. But for our purposes tonight, problem of practice, it should be, and obviously you can look at these yourself, but the big ones is it connected to your work, right? And if so, how? Will you be able to observe the work, right? Will you be able to address is it possible to address this work given your team's sphere of influence, that third bullet point from the bottom, right? Those are really important. And then lastly, obviously, probably goes without saying, it shouldn't have a clear answer. Right? You shouldn't be able to solve this with a system or a structure in your organization. That's a totally different type of problem. And that's one that you can just kind of brainstorm different systems and practice using those. So something very, very different. Just want to name that. And then the other part of this is guiding questions to determine a problem of practice. What's happening? How do we know? What do we know? What's the overall purpose being served? And then I think the most important one there is whose voices are being silenced, excluded, or denied. And that's something that I would urge everyone to keep at the forefront of your processing tonight, but also just in terms of if you'd ever decide to use this process. which I definitely highly recommend because it's a really powerful tool that a lot of organizations and a lot of groups are using. So I'll leave it at that. And then just kind of getting back to the overall process of design thinking one last time before we move into the next phase. Empathize, right? Conducting interviews, defining, gaining insights and noticing patterns and trends, ideating, coming up with ways to solve the dilemma or the problem faced by the individuals or communities, developing those prototypes like we talked about, and then testing it. So now we're going to pause. That was 20 minutes of me talking. I'm going to turn it over to you all, mostly for the rest of the night. And we're going to start with something really easy, right? And so this is a pretty easy experience that your only role is to talk about yourself with another person. And so it looks like, and I can't tell based on what I'm seeing, but it looks like we have 12 participants. I know there's 3 of us on here that are running the work for tonight. So 9, we can probably do 3 groups of 3. And what you're going to do in those 3 groups of 3 in the course of 3.5 minutes is you got 30 seconds to organize yourself. Who's going to go first? Who's going to go second? Who's going to go third? And then depending on that, you're going to, the first person and the second person and the third person are all going to answer the same question, or the same prompt, excuse me. I was born, and that's what brought me here today. The important part is, as you're a listener, what are the connections that you make? And think about what follow-up questions you would want to ask. Those are the 2 big ones as a practice for some of the work that we're doing later tonight. So again, what are your connections to the stories that people are telling? And then what are the follow-up questions that you would want to ask, probing questions to the folks that you're meeting with? So I'll leave it at that. If there are any questions, feel free to take yourself off mute, ask, or just pop in the chat. I am going to stop sharing. And Sarah, are we good? Turn it back off once you're done, but would love to hear from folks, not necessarily what your story was, but what did you listen for? What connections did you make? And then any probing questions that you would have liked to have been able to ask.
This is Brittany. I don't mind sharing. So just similarities in where we may have grown up and how we've gotten to Texas came up in our call. So I'd love to follow up a little bit more with that. So that was interesting.
Awesome. Thank you. Anyone else?
So this is Marisa down in the valley, and we heard about school gardens, and I wanted to hear a little bit more, but it was kind of a short conversation between us. But I want to say real quick, I have a lot of dreams in my life of things that I've wanted to do, careers, jobs, and this Roam Wild, I cannot believe you're doing it, because that was one of my dreams of getting kids, because that's what I have to talk to you later and connect, because oh my God, it blew my mind that you're doing this. But
yes, please. Yeah, definitely. Please. Would love to.
Okay.
Any last lingering comments? All right, so we will go ahead, and I'm gonna get this next one up before, and then go ahead and share. There we go. All right, so that opening was really meant to just be kind of a practice, both as a get to know you and who's on the call, but also as a way to practice empathy, right? So one of the things that we know is really important when practicing empathy is active listening. And so hopefully that you had a chance there to do some active listening. And probing questions, building connections are a huge, huge part of that. So as we kind of shift into the deeper methodology and kind of core practices of empathy interviews. Just keep those two pieces that we just practiced in mind, in addition to these here. And again, obviously they're on the screen, you can read these yourself, but just to kind of call out a couple, one of the things that automatically happens if you're the interviewer is you automatically have, there's automatically a hierarchy, right? And it's really important to, depending on, because you're the interviewer or because of who you are versus the person you're interviewing, it's really, really important to do what you can to build relationship quickly, build rapport, but then also through that building of relationship, diminish any hierarchies that might exist. And so that's something that you want to pay close attention to in this work. The other piece is, and this is kind of one of the things that I think about when I'm doing these interviews, is success equals emotion. So when people start to trust you more, they start to open up and dialogue with you about things that they've experienced. Emotion is not always an easy thing for people to express, right? Not all of us wear our emotions on our sleeve. I think it's great when people do, but I also think that there's a lot of folks that don't, right? And it's a comfort thing. So as much as you can build out that relationship in order to get to the successful place of people emoting, it's really important. Things you want to stay away from, certainly your experiences, right? When you're interviewing others for empathy interviews, your opinions do not matter, right? This is not about you. This is all about them and collecting the right evidence. Stay away from leading questions, things that are getting toward an answer that you might want. That isn't honest and it's not helpful for the process. If you know what you're going to do, just do it. Don't bother with the process, right? But to honor the process, stay away from leading questions. And then lastly, this is also not about selling an idea, right? And so in order to do that truly and fully, you've got to kind of be really clear with them that you're genuinely looking for their ideas or their experiences, their lived experiences through X, Y, and Z questions that you're asking them. So, and with that, we're going to jump into, if I can get back to this, there we go. We're going to jump back into opportunities to practice empathy interviews. So we're going to go into the same rooms. Ideally, though, let's Sarah, if we can swing it, we definitely want to do 3 in a room so that we have an additional person who is there to help gather evidence. If not, totally fine. I know it's not a huge group, but it would be helpful for us. So we're going to do 2 rounds. The first round is one person interviewing. The one other person is just going to be collecting notes and will stay silent. And then one person is the interviewee. Up to you who you want to do that. You've got a total of 10 minutes to do this, but you want to quickly call out who's going to be the interviewee. And those are going to be questions 1 and 2 from the guide that you have in front of you, the tiny URL. Then the next, sorry, the next round that you'll do in this 10 minutes is switching the roles and doing questions 3 and 4. If you want to focus on probing questions and you only get to questions 1 and 2, that's totally okay, right? The idea is to collect as much evidence as possible. And really, if you haven't opened them yet, I'll just tell you the meat of it is where do you feel most comfortable, or when do you feel most comfortable or safe? And then what are experiences or stories where you don't feel comfortable or safe? And so we want to collect evidence around both those things. If you only get to one of them and you focus on probing questions, practicing that, I think that's totally fine. This is really meant to be an opportunity for y'all to practice that. So, awesome. All right, so hopefully, that was right. Let's try that again. Hopefully you had a chance to collect some evidence and good interview data. We are going to move into the next section of the design process. And these next 3 sections, both for sake of time and for our work to kind of just practice working through the design charrette is going to go pretty quick, right? So there is a Jamboard because of the size of the group, and also just because we've got a little bit of work that's already been done on one of the Jamboards. I'm going to ask everybody to go ahead and hop into Jamboard number 1 using that tiny URL that's right there on the screen. Before, or as you're doing that, I guess I should say, as you're doing that, oh, thanks, Sarah. Your work for the next 3 minutes is going to be just kind of silent work time. We won't put in anybody in breakout rooms or anything, but you're going to go to that first Jamboard, and when you're in there, you're actually going to go to the second slide. Before we move forward with doing any work, though, let me just, in case there's anybody, oh, not what I wanted to do, sorry. In case there's anybody that has not had a chance to work on a Jamboard before, just to give you some kind of background. So these are sticky notes on here that you can get using this icon here. It's a little, looks like a sticky note. You click on the sticky note, this comes up, you can type whatever you'd like into it. As soon as you hit return, it'll automatically populate as a sticky note on the slide. We're going to go to slide 2. You get there by going here. If you end up accidentally drawing or making a mark with your pen, just make sure to erase it until we get to that next section where you're going to actually use the pen to draw circles around some key areas. But for right now, this is the only one that you're going to be using as sticky note. So we're going to put 3 minutes on the clock. In those 3 minutes, go ahead and all the kind of most important notes from the questions that you received or the questions that you answered or asked, the data from those interviews, go ahead and populate one idea per sticky note, right? So you don't want to draw it out multiple ideas per sticky note, one idea per sticky note. And this is going to be just kind of a busy time work session to get all of that information out. So if there are any questions, go ahead and pop yourself off mute. Otherwise, I'm going to put 3 minutes on the timer and we will get rolling. Everybody able to access any questions? All right, go ahead and sticky note. And again, we're on the second frame.
Can you explain again? Sorry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So you're on the Jamboard, correct?
Yes.
Awesome. So as you're on the Jamboard, go to, and I'm still sharing, so you can see the Jamboard up in front of me, yeah?
Uh-huh.
Okay, so not this first slide, but the second slide, using the arrows to get over there. You're gonna go to this sticky note icon, click that, and then any of the data or evidence that you gathered from your interviews, one idea per sticky note, you're just gonna kind of dump that into each sticky note, hit return, and it'll automatically populate on our Jamboard, which is what we're using here.
Okay.
Some
Thank
people,
you.
yeah, absolutely, no problem. Got about a minute left before we transition. So as many of the ideas that you gathered from your interviews, go ahead and put those up. All right, let's go ahead and bring it back. Thank you for putting those in there. So, and this is a little tricky because we're looking for as many data points as we can, and we've got a small group, which I totally get. So I'm going to kind of use the last group's slide. But as we're doing that, if you are able or you notice any patterns, feel free to move through this process on this slide 2. So if I go back one, so I ended up taking out a bunch of the sticky notes from the previous group just because I didn't want to clutter our space for tonight. But there were 5 sticky notes that really kind of spoke to this idea of shared experiences, right? And so folks having, and these are all from different people that were on the last call, that they put up as having interviewed and received this response from the interview question. The idea of shared experience, this is the defining phase of the empathy of the design process, right? And so once we've organized our ideas into patterns or themes, right, grouped those patterns or themes, we can then define them as statements, right? So from here, what I would ask, and anybody that wants to can pop themselves off of mute, this is going to be it should be pretty easy to answer this one, but what do you feel like are the needs of the folks who answered this way? What are the needs of the individuals who, in this example here, shared experience, what do they need in order to feel safe and comfortable moving into a new space? What might they need, I should say?
It looks like they need to have some sort of connection with someone else in the group.
Yes, right, absolutely. Making connections with both people as well as the experiences that those people have, right? And so finding ways for, in this case, shared experiences for this group to have would be one need that we can identify from our community interviews. And so from there, this is going into kind of the last step before we start actually testing, is we've identified the need, right? And then from that need, we move into prototyping. So what might be a prototype or an experience or activity that this group of individuals, or that a group of individuals who want shared experiences might have, or what could we create as a prototype that we could test for shared experiences? And feel free to just pop yourself off mute or pop it in the chat if that's easier. So
Are you saying that the prototype would be an experience in itself?
Yes, ma'am. Yep, exactly.
Yeah, so some kind of like outing or something.
Yeah,
like
right.
A hike.
So, yeah, exactly. Yeah, so one of the types of things that we might prototype is an experience in nature, right? Where we actually bring the group outside to experience a common experience together, a shared experience together, and that we can both observe and collect evidence through additional interviews or survey data to understand how did it go, what went well, what didn't go well, would they do this again, right? If so, why, or what would they like to see done differently? As kind of a further example of this, a few months ago, we took a group of kids rock climbing. I think rock climbing is probably one of the most profound shared experiences that, especially for kids that have never gone rock climbing before, or people that have never gone rock climbing before, it's a challenge, right? It's a challenge. It's also fear of heights is one of the more significant phobias that people have. at whatever level that phobia might exist. And so that shared experience of a challenge, especially challenging situations in the outdoors, is a super powerful way to build connections and comfort with one another. And so this is a group of kids that hadn't had time together, but after that experience, after that shared experience, they felt really connected to one another because they had to trust one another. So this is a very, very brief, very quick kind of overview of the process. We've gone all the way from prototyping, and again, we would come up with several different prototypes, right? This is just one example of something we might do from the needs that we've identified in this process. Test, right, as many of those prototypes as we can, collect the evidence, and then refine. So I am going to go ahead and stop share. Let me just make sure and go back here. Oh gosh. We've got a little bit of time. We've got about 5 minutes. I know that there's a survey for folks, but just as a heads up, you will be getting a link to this presentation, and there are some additional material citations primarily down here that you can kind of further learn about the design thinking process. I'll also just say, as I'm hopping off of the share, if you would like to connect around any of this, I know this is like a very brief touch point. It takes time to kind of like feel your way through this process. I've done this a dozen times, and every time there's kind of just this like, what do we do next, right? And that's why I said one of the norms is like embrace the messiness, because it is a messy process, but it's also a really powerful process. So I'll leave the last couple minutes open for anybody who might have any questions or wonderings or feedback. Always love feedback. But if not, thank you all so much for joining tonight. Really appreciate it.
I think Brittany and I wanted to hear a little bit more about the organization that you formed, and then what you're actually doing. Like, I'm very interested in hearing more about it. I don't know if you have time to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for asking. I appreciate that. We are looking, we are bringing kids on outdoor excursions. If you want to see a list of kind of what we've offered this year, you're welcome to hop on the website and check out those offerings. We're going to continue to build opportunities for kids to experience the outdoors through 1-day trips, 3-day trips, 5-day trips, all the way up to eventually we'll build out to 30-day trips. We are looking at grants and philanthropic donations from local community members to supplement the fees associated with each trip. And that has, we've benefited a great deal from the local community of the local outdoor community, which thankfully there's a huge community of outdoor enthusiasts to kind of fill the gaps that we need to fill in terms of financial need for kids that can't afford it. If you want to kind of get into the nitty gritty, I'm happy to hop on a call, but the basic premise is making sure that every single kid that wants to experience the outdoors, and or families that see the value in experiencing the outdoors, has that opportunity. And then obviously additionally, to bring kids from diverse backgrounds together to help break down barriers of difference, right? That's like the main reason that we exist. So I have a background in climbing and mountaineering, in a lot of canoeing in the Northwoods of Minnesota, did a little bit of leading in Rocky Mountain National Park, was at the YMCA for 4 years up there, and have just a wealth of knowledge of that area, but also just think it's so important to get kids outside. So that'll be kind of future trips that we bring kids up there as well. Yeah.
Is it for the Dallas area only? Are you expanded?
No.
Like, how far is your reach?
Oh, all over the state, and even beyond. So we had, for one of our trips this year, we had kids coming in from San Antonio, Austin, outside of Austin. Actually 2 from San Antonio, one from Austin, and then we had an interested family from Houston, but they ended up not being able to make it. So, and then Dallas as well. So no, we're not just Dallas. We want anybody that would like to be involved to get involved. I will say that, you know, it does require folks to come up to Denver, or to Dallas, excuse me. And we take off from Dallas is where we connect with the counselors, and then they leave from Dallas in the vans.
I'll reach out separately. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much. Good to chat with you.
And Adam, we've got a question in the chat from April. She asks, have you used this process to build relationships between your campers?
That's a great question. So the short answer is no. I think it would require us to have a long enough time together to define an issue that we wanted to solve together. At the base level, though, I will say that this is a process that I talk about with the campers. When they say another survey, I say yes, because I need all of the feedback that I can get, because I want to build a program around your needs. And then we kind of very briefly touch on the design thinking process and how that works and why we need their feedback. But yeah.
Okay, I don't see any other questions in the chat. Thank you so much, Adam. Really appreciated your time tonight. Just a couple of announcements. I did put our evaluation in the chat. So if you wouldn't mind putting that, filling that out for us, that would be super helpful, because as Adam says, all the information from you makes us do better. And so would love to have y'all fill that out. Also, our summit registration is officially open. The summit is in December in Austin. And so if you would like to register for the summit, we would love to have you there. And then lastly, our monthly webinar next month is on story walks. So hopefully y'all can join us for that as well. So both of those links are in the chat. And thank you so much. And y'all have a fantastic evening.
Thank you.
Oh, email address. Sorry, I should have put that in the presentation.
And Marisa, I can do a virtual introduction to Adam for you as well.
There you go. Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate it. Thanks so much, Sarah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Anytime. We'll see y'all later.